Hello, I'm Dan Heber, and this is the lecture video to accompany the reading assignment on John Locke. And that assignment begins on page 597 of the PDF. And I'm going to jump right in and pick up where we left off from last time. In the previous video, I had mentioned that the primary difference between Hobbes's version of the social contract and Locke's version of the social contract is that Hobbes thinks that once you're in the social contract, you're in it, that there is no backing out, there is no so-called right to revolution, according to Thomas Hobbes, because a revolution, the result of the revolution is just anarchy, which is the very thing that you were trying to escape by forming a social contract in the first place. So Hobbes sees it as inherently contradictory, or Hobbes sees the right to revolution as inherently contradictory because it's just going to revert back to a state of anarchy, because if you overthrow the government, then by definition there is no government, and that means that you're back to the state of nature, which was the very thing that you were trying to escape by forming a social contract in the first place. So that's what John Chafee, the author of a textbook is pointing out in this yellow highlighted passage. As with Hobbes, the social contract is freely consented to, right? So in the state of nature, no one's forcing us to sign this social contract. We do that on our own. And why do we do that on our own? Well, because life in the state of nature is just so horrible, right? It's solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, according to Hobbes. For Locke, though, so this is getting into the difference. So both Hobbes and Locke are similar in the sense that they're both social contract theorists, and they both use this hypothetical sort of not hypothetical, this state of nature as the entry point into the social contract. For Locke, however, the state is the servant of the people. So for Hobbes, remember, the Leviathan, the state, the governmental authority, whatever you want to call it, does not have any obligations to its citizens. The citizens can have an obligation to one another as a result of a contract that's enforced by the Leviathan, but there is no such thing as an obligation that the state, the Leviathan, the governmental authority has to its citizens. It just has one job, and that's to make sure that the citizens obey their word, but there are no direct obligations that the governmental authority has to individual citizens. That's in Hobbes's version of the social contract. John Locke's version of the social contract is very different. For Locke, Chafee continues, the state is the servant of the people, and if the state fails to live up to the terms of the agreement, it can be dismissed through revolution. So remember, according to Hobbes, the state owes you nothing. There's nothing that the state has to do beyond enforce the contracts that individual citizens make with one another. That's it. That's the role. That's the extent of the social contract. For Locke, there is something that the government has to do. The governmental authority has to enforce the natural law. So what Locke is going to say, yes, we're in this, that there is such a thing as a state of nature, but whereas in Hobbes, the state of nature is a state of absolute and free license. Remember that for Hobbes, in the state of nature, you even have the right to someone else's body. That is how extreme the liberty is in Hobbes's version of the state of nature. What Locke says is he's modifying that state of nature. What Locke is going to say, yes, we existed, we at one point exist in the state of nature, but even in the state of nature, it's a state of freedom, but it's not a state of license, meaning that even prior to the formation of government, there are some things that you're not supposed to do, and there's some things that you are supposed to do. Remember, for Hobbes, state of nature is anything goes. There literally is no right or wrong in the state of nature. For Hobbes, the concepts of right and wrong are invented by this social contract. Prior to the formation of the social contract, there is no justice and no injustice. There is no right, there is no wrong. It's only after we have the social contract that we have right and wrong. So if I steal some of your corn, in the state of nature, I haven't done anything wrong. I'm just trying to survive, right? I'm just trying not to starve to death. And if you have food and I don't have food, well, then I'm going to try to get some food so that I don't die of starvation, right? That's, what Hobbes is going to say is that's not me being a bad person. That's just me being a person, right? People are looking out for themselves. People are trying not to die. That's it. It's only after the social contract where stealing your corn, stealing your chicken would be bad, according to Hobbes. What Locke is going to say is that even though the state of nature is a state of freedom, it's not a state of absolute license, meaning that even in the state of nature, there are still things that I'm not supposed to do, meaning that even in the state of nature, I can still behave justly or unjustly. Very different from Hobbes's account. And another point of difference here, just to put a button on that, now these prefatory remarks, that if the government is not doing what it's supposed to do, which is to enforce the natural law, if the government is failing in that or is going against the enforcement of the natural law, then then the citizens have the right and even the obligation to overthrow the government. So, with those prefatory notes and obvious difference out of the way, let's get into the material here. The material from John Locke, looking at that excerpt from his second treatise of civil government. And of course, we talked about John Locke earlier in the semester. We talked about John Locke's materialism and we talked about his empiricism. We're getting into his social political philosophy now, which is informed by his empiricist commitments and his materialist commitments. And I'll mention that in passing as we go here. But what John Locke does here, and what he's doing here rather, in this pink highlighted passage, is just to identify, the topic of what he's doing. He's placing himself within the social contract tradition. So he's talking about the state of nature. And so what he says about that, and I'll just go ahead and read this pink highlighted passage, to understand political power right and derive it from its original, we must consider what state all men are naturally in. That is a state of perfect freedom. Now remember the distinction I was making earlier. There's a difference between freedom and license. State of nature, it's a state of freedom, but it's not a state of license. I'm free, but that doesn't mean that I can just do anything the hell I want to do. And we'll explain how Locke identifies those limitations here in a second. Within the bounds of the law of nature, without asking leave or depending upon the will of any other man. So what Locke is doing there is he's saying, yes, Hobbes was sort of right here in that we have the state of nature. But Hobbes is wrong in his account of that state of nature, and that's where he starts to modify it right here in section 6. But though the state of nature is a state of liberty, it is not a state of license. So what John Locke is doing here is identifying a position that has come to be known as classical liberalism. Classical liberalism is just this notion of maximization of individual freedom and liberty to the point where it is compatible with a similar liberty for others. So what a classic what a classic liberal would say, what a classic libertarian would say on this topic is that your right to swing your fist ends where my nose begins. And what we mean by that is that we don't want to tell you that you can't go around swinging your fist because it's your body. And if you want to airbox, that's on you. You can swing your fist, right? We don't want to unjustifiably restrict your body because it's your body and you can do what you want with your body, with certain provisos. And that certain proviso is that you can't interfere with someone else's body, right? So you have a right to swing your fist, but you can't just swing your fist wherever you want, because if you swing your fist wherever you want, it might affect my nose. And so in order to protect my liberty, we're going to have to be restricting your liberty a little bit, right? We don't want to restrict it to the point where we're telling you that you can't move your arms at all, That's not justifiable, right? Clearly, there are your arms and you have the right to move them. But you don't have the right to move them in a manner that interferes with my liberty. So that's what John Locke is saying here. That's what he means when he says that in the state of nature, it's a state of liberty, right? It's a state of freedom. It's not a state of license. For Hobbes, state of nature is anything goes. I even have the right to someone else's body in the state of nature. John Locke is poo-pooing that right at the beginning. He's saying, no, 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 no. Just because we don't have a civil government, just because there's not a police force, doesn't mean that you can just do whatever the hell you want. And what Locke is doing here in section 7 is expanding upon this notion of natural rights existing in the state of nature. And I'll go ahead and read this passage here. Locke says that, and that all men may be restrained from invading others' rights and from doing hurt to one another, and the law of nature observed. What he means there is that the state of nature has the law of nature. And in the state of nature, there's obviously, no police force, because that's what we mean by the state of nature, right? Whenever we talk about the state of nature, we're talking about a time that exists prior to the formation of civil society. So if there's no civil society, there's no judges, there's no legislatures, there's no police force, there's no army, there's none of that, right? It's just you and I existing without society, without culture. But even then, because the law of nature is always in place, even though I'm in the state of nature, I'm still bound by the law of nature. I can't just do whatever the hell I want, and neither can you. There are restrictions on our actions, and those restrictions on our actions come from the law of nature. And there's this law of nature that commands us not to hurt one another, right? So how do we know that? Well, because I don't want my nose to be hurt, right? And so if I don't want my nose to be hurt, that puts a restriction upon you, but it also puts a restriction on me, because of that we have this principle of reason that says, well, if your actions are going to be restricted because I want to keep my nose intact, well, then my actions are going to have to be restricted to keep your nose intact. So you can't just do whatever the heck you want with your fist, but neither can I, right? And it's reason that informs us of that we ought not to hurt one another. So that's what natural law dictates, and we can become aware of the natural law through an application of reason. Now, because it's the natural law, and because we're existing in the state of nature, which means that there's no police force, if I am witness to someone else who is having their rights violated by somebody else, then I would be justified in stepping in and punishing the transgressor of that. Excuse me. So that's what John Locke is saying here. He's saying that that men may be restrained from invading others' rights. So if I'm witness to someone being assaulted, then I would be justified in stepping in and preventing that person from assaulting somebody else, precisely because that other person would be in transgression of what the natural law requires. So the execution of the law of nature is, in that state, he's still talking about the state of nature, put into everyone's hands. And so in the state of nature, everyone has this duty and responsibility to enforce the law of nature, whereby everyone has a right to punish the transgressors of that law. So oftentimes, people speak about vigilante justice. What we mean by vigilante justice is taking the law into your own hands, meaning that taking it away from the police and taking it into your own hands. But there's only such a thing as vigilante justice if there's a police force, right? If there's no police force, there's no such thing as vigilante justice. So just as, that there's no piracy if there's no such thing as free trade. We can only have piracy if there is in fact free trade. But in the absence of free trade, piracy can't exist. Well, the same thing with vigilantism, right? Vigilantism can only exist in the presence of civil authority. If there's no civil authority, then there's no vigilantism. And so what Locke is doing here is he's saying that in the state of nature, in the state of nature, the law of nature still applies. And because there's no police force, it's up to us as individuals to enforce the law of nature. He says that if anyone in the state of nature may punish another for any evil he has done, everyone may do so, for in that state of perfect equality, where naturally there is no superiority or jurisdiction of one over another, what any may do in prosecution of that law, everyone needs to have the right to do. So another similarity between Hobbes and Locke is that state of nature, everyone's equal, right? We all have the same basic needs, wants, and desires. And we're also equal in the sense that we are all accountable for what the law of nature is. So therefore, the law of nature not only applies to me, it applies to others. And if I see others violating the law of nature, then I have the right and the duty to enforce it. And if other people see me violating the law of nature, then they have the right and the duty to enforce it. Now, this is related to the formation of the political society, political government, because it brings up this notion of, well, if in the state of nature there's still the law of nature, and if we're all capable of, and have this duty to enforce the law of nature, then why do we even need to have civil authority and civil law to begin with? If we already have natural law, and if everyone has access to the natural law through their rational reflection, then why do we need civil law to begin with? Now that's an important question for Locke, and he answers it here in section 123 in these two passages. So, if a man in state of nature be so free, as has been said, if he be the absolute lord of his own person and possessions, equal to the greatest and subject to nobody, why will he part with his freedom, right? So why would we agree to join society and all the rules that come with society, right? In the state of nature, you could just walk around naked all the time, right? You don't have to wear pants to work in the state of nature because you can just do whatever the hell you want. But in society, you gotta wear pants, right? That's a restriction on your liberty. And why would you give up walking around naked whenever you have that option to do so? Why would you agree to put on pants and go to work, right? Well, what Locke says is very similar to what Hobbes says in the joining of the social contract, because we recognize that we're better off as a result of it, that we're giving up a little bit of individual freedom, but we're getting something in return, and what we're getting in return is safety and security. Because even though in the state of nature I have the right to enforce the law of nature, I'm not always going to be capable of doing so. And that's what Locke is pointing out here. He says, why would we give up this empire, right? In the state of nature, it's a state of freedom. Why would I give up that freedom? Even though it's not a state of license, it's still a state of freedom. And of course, if you are going to be living with other people in civil society, you're going to be giving up some of your individual liberties. You're not going to be able to drive as fast as you want, right? You're going to have to drive on a specific side of the road. You're not going to be able to cross the road at any location. You're going to have to, cross the road at, a crosswalk at an intersection. So you're giving up certain liberties. And why would you give that up? Well, Locke says, well, the answer is obvious. That though in the state of nature we have all those rights, right? We have all those freedoms, yet the enjoyment of it is uncertain and constantly exposed to the invasion of others. For all kings, as much as he, every man his equal, and the greater part no strict observers of equity and justice, the enjoyment of the property he has in this state is unsafe and unsecure. Meaning that I have the right to enforce the law of nature, but I won't always have the strength necessary or the power necessary to enforce the law of nature. And so we need to enter into civil society and civil authority so that I can just pick up the phone and dial 911 and have somebody else with training and equipment to enforce the rights that I have. Locke continues here. The great and chief end, therefore, of men's uniting into commonwealths, right? That's entering the social contract and putting themselves under government, right? We're going to put ourselves under government, and of course, we're going to be losing some liberty. I'm going to have to pay taxes. I'm going to have to drive on the right-hand side of the road. I'm going to have to, obey the speed limit. Those sorts of things. I'm giving up certain rights and liberties. And why would I do that? Well, so that I can be protected. Specifically for Locke, it's about the protection of property. I want to keep what's mine, and you want to keep what's yours. And so here again, we have some similarity with Hobbes. But where Hobbes says that we are fundamentally selfish, Locke says, well, yes, we are selfish, but that doesn't mean that we're bad, because the natural law still applies. So there's three reasons here that Locke gives to why we would need the civil law in addition to already having the natural law. I'm not going to cover that. I'm going to ask you to read that because there's a question in the assignment module about that distinction there. But this is where you're going to find the answer to that discussion question. And let me scroll down here. So the basis of the right to property for John Locke. John Locke sees that the reason why we have civil authority is to enforce property rights, so that I get to keep my corn and you get to keep your chickens. Now the reason for that, according to Locke, is because, well, you acquire property through your body. That you work, you engage in labor, and with your work and with your labor you earn money, and with that money you buy things, and you say that certain things are mine and certain things are not mine. Well, you don't say, I guess I say certain things are mine and certain things are not mine, and you say certain things are yours and you say certain things are not yours. And so my car, for example, my shirt, I think I used it as an example earlier. This is not your shirt, this is my shirt. What makes it my shirt? Well, because I'm the one that bought it, right? That's what makes it mine. It makes it mine because I paid for it with my money. And how did I get that money? Well, I worked for it. But I can't work unless I have a body. And so my body is my own, right? And because my body is my own, any labor that I do is also my own. Nobody else has a claim to my labor. My labor is mine. It's an extension of my body, and my body is a gift from God. That's not communal property, it's private property. And so because my body is mine, and because my labor is just an extension of my body, then anything that I buy with the money that I earn from my labor ultimately comes from my body, which is my own. And that ultimately for Locke is why it's important to protect private property, because private property is just an extension of the body. And nobody has a right to my body but me. Nobody has a right to your body but you. And so any labor that you do, you're using your body, and you're going to be using your body to engage in labor and then purchase something with the money that you got from the labor that's an extension of your body. That's yours. It's not mine. Just because somebody else might need the thing you have more than you need it, it doesn't mean that they have a right to have it, right? There's only one person that has a right to your property, and that is you. And the purpose of government is to enforce property rights, because that's ultimately a protection of the individual's body. And again, nobody has the right to your body but you. So here again, on the dissolution of government, what Locke is going to say, what justifies the dissolution of government is if the government is not doing sufficient work to protect the preservation of property, right? So it's all property rights for Locke here which are important. And I've been emphasizing the basis of that, the justification for that, because property is an extension of the body, and the body is the only person that has the right to the body is the individual themselves. That's it. So that wraps up the high points here of what I was wanting to talk about for the reading assignment for today. So I'm going to go ahead and let you go, and I will ask you to enjoy the rest of the day, and I'll see you in the next video.